Hour number 2 of the show here on your Thursday. Nice to have you with us today. Matt and Patrick here, 952-946-6205, 952-946-6205. My next guest is the best Secretary of State in the entire United States of America. He's Minnesota's. He's Secretary of State Steve Simon, and he's kind enough today to join us to talk about all the things we need to talk about before we get to the election. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me. I always appreciate it.
I always love having you on. How are things going for you? I mean, it's obviously it's been a busy year for you so far. How's the office going? Is it? I imagine it's stressful, but things seem to be working pretty well.
I'm confident here. We're at day minus 26 today, and I've been saying for a long time that my 2 goals this election cycle, if I could wave a magic wand, my 2 wishes, my 2 goals would be high turnout and low drama. 2 things I want, high turnout and low drama. In Minnesota, confident about high turnout. 3 out of the last 4 elections, we were number 1 in the country. We're aiming to do that again. We just yesterday released a TV ad as part of our Here We Vote campaign, urging Minnesotans to vote and, of course, get us back to number 1. So we've got good laws in Minnesota, even better, made even better last year by some of the new ones that we got passed in the Minnesota legislature. So high turnout, pretty safe bet. The low drama part, be up to a lot of us. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about low drama, by the way, I don't mean low intensity or low energy or low passion. Of course we should have energy and passion around an election like this. That's natural and normal and healthy. We just don't want violence or the threat of political violence. We cannot have that. To make Election Day and its aftermath able, ultimately something that leads to an acceptance of the results, if those results aren't what personally might accept the results. So 26 days out, I'm feeling good. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of partners. Putting on an election is always a team sport. I think we're in a really good spot.
Secretary of State Steve Simon joining us right now. You bring this up, and if I can start with this, one of the things I've seen the Republicans talking a lot of in the state is something called they want to recruit poll challengers. And you and I have talked in the past, when you go to vote, there's no one there that can kind of really, as long as you're registered to vote, you've got everything is set and ready to go. No one can really challenge you and say that person can't vote. I mean, when they use the term poll challengers, I think that's a little incendiary.
We have real rules around that. Each party can only designate one person per polling place, not a swarm of people. And once that one challenger per polling place shows up, that person can't speak to a voter. That person can't be within 6 feet of a voter. That person can only issue challenges to a voter based on personal knowledge. That's the exact phrase in the law. It can't be a hunch, a whim, a bad feeling, a bad vibe. It can't be a challenger saying, I just don't like the looks of her. Or that guy was speaking Spanish in the hallway. He can't possibly be a citizen. It's got to be personal knowledge, like, hey, I saw her waving around her French passport. Or I know him from my neighborhood and he's 17, not 18. That's fine. But I feel good about the laws we have in place and the training that we have for the election judges, the poll workers, to spot challengers who are going beyond what the law allows. We've had a good record in Minnesota of pretty tranquil polling places, and a lot of it is because of those really clear laws.
Mm-hmm. There has been a little concern about, of course, we do have some new rules out there that basically that people, if undocumented people can get a driver's license, that somehow they're going to be able to vote and stuff like this. Talk a little bit about this misinformation campaign and the guardrails we have in place here to make sure that the integrity of these elections are still in place.
Right. So it is true. We have a new law that allows people, regardless of immigration status, to get a driver's license. And we have a new law that says that if a person goes and renews a driver's license, they could be automatically registered. But here is the important piece. The law is crystal clear. The only records of people applying for or getting driver's licenses that are even allowed to be put in the pile to be possibly registered, people who have shown what they call citizenship-affirming documentation. I know that sounds bureaucratic, but it basically means a passport. It means naturalization papers. It means a birth certificate. Now, it is true that earlier this summer we discovered that there were a couple instances of people who had not provided all that information who were set to be added to the voter registration list. That's not to say they were ineligible voters. There are plenty of eligible voters who didn't provide that information, and there were people who conflated the two. They looked at that and they said, aha, these are illegal voters. These are ineligible voters. Not true. And so we, in an abundance of caution, law didn't require us to, but we just decided, just to be safe, to inactivate those few records where that applied. And more to the point, we worked with the Department of Public Safety, they're the ones who run the driver's license stuff, to implement some new procedures, some new policies that we think will ensure that the system will really be airtight going forward. So the law is very clear on that. Unless you provide that citizenship-affirming documentation, you're not going to be even considered or put in the pile to be potentially registered to vote.
And it should mention that when you put that fix into place, a lot of Republicans commended you because it did fit. Like I said, sometimes oversight does happen that you need to get in there and reevaluate something you did. You fixed the problem, and a lot of Republicans commended your office for taking care of that.
Well, it's no different than anything in life, right? When you find a glitch or a mistake, you can't lose your head about it. You got to go in and try to fix it, and more importantly, try to put in place some system so that you hope it'll never happen again. And so we caught it. We caught it early. Zero, I want to emphasize this, there's no evidence that even one voter in the primary in August this summer who was ineligible voted as a result of automatic voter registration. So we think we've run it to ground, and that's a good thing. And I think overall it's going to be a really good law for Minnesota.
There has been, and there still is, this ongoing war about misinformation, that somehow the freedom of speech incurs that you can tell somebody of a wrong polling place, the wrong date to vote, the wrong procedure to get registered to vote, that somehow all of that is protected speech. We did address a little bit of that here in the state of Minnesota, correct?
Yeah, right, absolutely. So Minnesota, last year in 2023, among the great new election-related laws and reforms that we have, is one that gets at election-related disinformation. Now, it was very carefully crafted. It was crafted to say that if someone knowingly disseminates knowingly false information, so it's knowingly false, the person knows it not to be true, and they disseminate it, and it's done for the purpose of interfering with someone's right to vote, then it's unlawful in the state of Minnesota. There was a legal action to invalidate the law on First Amendment grounds. And just a couple of weeks ago, the federal court in Minnesota ruled that no, the law withstood the challenges. It is okay. It is absolutely consistent with the First Amendment to legislate something like that when it's intentionally done for the purpose of interfering with someone's right to vote. It's not accidental. It's not someone passing along information that they thought was correct, but it wasn't correct. It's a purposeful attempt to interfere. And, the example that I sometimes give is, this isn't such a new idea for us. Think about commercial speech, in business. We've long had laws in this country going back many, many decades. You can't claim things about your product that aren't true. If a chewing gum company said that their gum cured cancer, absolutely the government can go to court or otherwise prevent them from saying that and impose penalties. That's not a new concept. So, of course, we all vigorously defend First Amendment freedoms, but there isn't a freedom to perpetrate a fraud on someone, and that's what this can be in the wrong hands.
We have this election coming up here, and I mean a lot of states do point to Minnesota as a state that does it right with the accessibility and the options that people have on how to vote. Let's remind everyone, we always have you on, we always go through all this because there are multiple ways that a person can vote this upcoming election.
Yeah, 3 ways to vote. One is the classic, in person, in a polling place, on Election Day. Everyone knows about that one. And by the way, I've got to plug our website. If you don't know where your polling place is, or you think maybe it moved, mnvotes.gov. MN, like Minnesota, VOTES.gov. You can type in right there your address, and it'll show your polling place. That's one way. The other 2 ways have to do with the early voting period, the early absentee voting period that we are in right now. So we are literally in the middle of that period right now. where there are two ways to vote absentee or before the election. One is, again, in person. If you don't know where to go, it's not likely to be your regular game day polling place, but it's usually your city hall, or maybe it's a county courthouse. Again, mnvotes.gov will show you where to go to vote in person before November 5th. And then the third way, the one that's gaining in popularity, is voting by mail, voting from home. You can go to the website, again, mnvotes.gov, order the ballot to come to you. You can vote from your couch, from your kitchen table, and you can either mail the ballot back. It's got to get back by Election Day, not postmarked by Election Day. Some states have that rule. We do not. Our rule is it has to get there. It has to arrive by the polls closing on Election Day. You can either mail it back, or if you don't trust the mail for whatever reason, you can hand deliver it, or even have someone you know and trust hand deliver it for you. If you're mailing it, I should say, give yourself at least a week. Mm-hmm. Given some of the recent postal issues, don't take the risk. We're saying give yourself at least a week, so the Tuesday before the Tuesday of the election, to pop that thing in the mail. And by the way, for the sake of your listeners, you don't have to wonder whether it got there. You don't have to say a prayer and hope it'll arrive on time when you throw it in the mail. You can track it like an Amazon package, like a UPS package. There's a code, and you can know for certain that it arrived and that it was processed.
Information is a good thing. I'm going to repeat something else you and I have talked about. Explain all the absentee ballots. They're in their envelopes. You've either done it in person or you mail it in. How is the process? How are those opened up and counted on Election Day?
Yeah, so here's the great part that should give a lot of peace of mind to people to make sure it's free of politics. So every absentee ballot that comes in has to go through something called an absentee ballot board. And I don't want to get into the minutia, but there is a party balance requirement. There are always Democrats and Republicans part of this board, and they're in the room, and they screen every ballot, every single ballot, not for who someone voted for. That they won't even know. But for whether or not the ballot, the voter did it right. Did they sign the ballot? Did they get a witness? Does everything check out? And then and only then is it put in the pile to actually be counted. And other people do the counting. And starting about 18 days before the election is when folks at the counties and cities can start opening those ballots that have been blessed to be put in that pile and start processing them. There's no pre-election tally. We don't go into Election Day saying, oh, so far the vote is such and such for candidate A and such for candidate B. They're all mixed in together on Election Day and all counted the same. And that's how it's done.
Obviously, there's also the other element here. We already have multiple people insisting somehow the election, which has not happened yet, is fraudulent. Talk a little bit about getting out in front of that basically making sure that the integrity of the election itself cannot be called into question, because let's face it, a lot of people do call it into question, not because of any real concerns other than the guy they wanted to win did not win.
Right. Well, I'll say, and I'm sure many of your listeners over the years have run into people who are sore losers after an election. It's quite a thing over the last few years to see people who are sore losers before the election has even taken place. And it's important to rebut, or I guess pre-but, some of those things. Let me just give you one example, since we talked about it here on the show. Voting by mail. So once in a while, somebody will say, hey, wait a minute, all these ballots going out in the mail, these blank ballots, how are we to know that some mailbox thief isn't camping out in a neighborhood and stealing 10 or 100 of these things? These are blank ballots just out there in people's mailboxes and voting them himself. The answer is that in Minnesota, we have 3 layers of security, more than almost any other state. You have to, when you order the ballot, you have to give some personal identifying information, like a driver's license number or part of a Social Security number. You have to sign the ballot, and you have to have a witness sign the ballot. So back to the mailbox thief, okay? He can try. He can try to take 5 or 10 or 100 of those things, but unless he knows the particular personal identifying information that each voter used when they ordered the ballot and writes that on the ballot, and he forges the signature of the voter, and he forges the signature of the witness, unless all 3 of those things are true, he's never going to get away with it, and he doesn't. That's probably the reason why in the years that I've had this job, I have not seen one case, not one, of that scenario, because we have the security. It's a secure system. Let me take another example. You brought up earlier in the segment the issue of ineligible folks, maybe non-citizens, and how do we know they're not voting? I direct your listeners to a study done that was released this summer by a professor at the University of St. Thomas Law School right here in the Twin Cities. He looked at 9 years' worth of ballots and records in Minnesota, 9 years' worth, from 2015 through the present, 2024. 13.4 million ballots were cast by Minnesotans during that span. 13.4 million. Do you know how many non-citizens he found had voted in 9 years and 13.4 million ballots?
No.
He found three. Now, that's three too many. All of us listening right now and on this conversation, we want it to be zero, and we wish it were zero. But let's put this in some rational perspective. 3 out of 13.4 million, that is a microscopic number of misconduct or level of misconduct. And the system is clean. We know that.
It is always, I'm so glad you are there. I can't tell you, like I said, we have the best Secretary of State in the nation here in Steve Simon. People still have questions how to get registered, where their voting location is. You got the sample ballots. You've got all that stuff. You have one website which will tell everyone what they need to know, correct?
That's it. It's mnvotes.gov. And if I can add,
sure,
we also have a phone number. We have a hotline. We have a call center that we are beefing up and staffing up right now in advance of the election. It's been going for a long, long time, but we're amping it up in terms of staffing. And if now, or even on game day, on election day, if as to you or someone else you have a question or you saw something that you didn't like or that was suspicious to you, that number is 877-600-VOTE. 877-600-VOTE.
All right. 877-600-VOTE, V-O-T-E, or mnvotes.gov. I'll link to both of those a little bit later on. Mr. Secretary, all my best. Thank you very much for the work that you and your entire staff are doing right now. We really much appreciate it. And thank you very much for the time today. I always enjoy chatting with you, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Secretary of State Steve Simon taking some time out to talk to you about voting. We'll take a break. Come on back. It's the Matt McNeil Show here on your Thursday.